The fishing town of Bagelport was not ready for a monster duck. Not a big goose, not a swan, a duck. A giant, house-sized, quacking terror that smashed boats with its beak and sent fishermen scrambling for their nets. The townsfolk screamed as the feathered menace waddled onto the docks. Luka Bringer screamed too, but with delight. Finally! A worthy foe! The barbarian leapt forward, sword raised high, and with one mighty swing managed to split a dock in half. The duck was unharmed. "Luka, the duck! Not the dock!" Argos Bringer shouted. His hands trembled as he fumbled through the words of a fire spell. The wizard, Luka's father, was pale as paper. "Did you say duck? Or something worse?" he muttered, glancing around nervously. Then, with a burst of courage he didn't feel, Argos cast a blazing bolt that singed the duck's wing. The duck quacked in outrage. Luka swung at the duck with all his might, and missed, shattering the side of a fishing boat instead. The vessel groaned, tipped, and sent its crew tumbling into the water. "Be calm, friends!" Hannah Aurum, cleric of the Golden Sun, spread her arms wide as panicked villagers scrambled for safety. Hannah clasped her hands and whispered a prayer to the Golden Sun. A protective light spread across the waves, wrapping around the frightened sailors like a warm embrace and guiding them safely to shore. She turned her gentle eyes back to Luka. "Sweet child, please. Ships are not our enemies." Ary Dorado had already vaulted onto a rooftop. With a flourish of her rapier, she struck a pose. "Ary Dorado, champion of justice, challenges you, fiendish fowl." She lunged, stabbed, and then tipped her hat as if bowing to an audience only she could see. The battle was chaotic. The duck charged, Luka charged louder, Ary mocked, Argos panicked, Hannah prayed. Luka's blade struck with reckless strength, knocking the beast sideways while Ary darted in with a flourish, jabbing it again and again between quips. "Face it, foul, you're all quack and no bite," she sang, twirling her rapier. In the end, somehow, miraculously, the monstrous duck was slain, toppled in a feathery heap on the dock. The villagers cheered. The mayor beamed. "Brave heroes, accept this reward of 1,000 gold pieces for saving our town." Moments later, he cleared his throat. "And here is the invoice for 800 gold pieces, for the docks, the ship, the chair Luka sat on." The party groaned. Luka looked genuinely confused. "But I didn't mean to break them." That night, the tavern overflowed with laughter and the smell of roast duck. The townsfolk had insisted on turning the monstrous bird into a feast for everyone, a celebration of their victory. Platters of golden meat were carried from table to table, mugs clinked, and children paraded the duck's giant feathers like banners. Ary carved a slice with theatrical flourish and raised her fork. "Well, at least the beast will make a finer duck à l'orange than it ever did, monster." Argos muttered about expenses. Hannah reminded them that people were safe, and wasn't that what mattered? Luka just grinned, grease on his chin, proud of himself. A traveling bard near the hearth struck up a ballad about the legendary wizard Fausto Aurum, slayer of fog giants, breaker of winter curses, and winner of hundreds of tavern chili contests. The tune was slightly out of key, but the refrain, "Fausto, Fausto," made the whole room thump along. Ary tipped her hat to the rhythm. Argos pretended not to care and listened anyway. Luka clapped along proudly. The laughter and music filled the tavern, mugs clinking and songs rising. Through the bustle, a cloaked figure pushed his way across the crowded room until he reached the hero's table. His boots left small puddles on the floor, his cloak plastered to his shoulders from rain. "Fausto Aurum requests your presence, immediately," the man said, voice low but urgent. Argos blinked, then snorted into his mug. "Speak of the devil. Sing about Fausto and he appears, well, at least by messenger." The one wizard he respected above all. Not that Argos would admit it out loud, of course. Instead, he sighed into his beard and muttered, "Of course Fausto calls for us the moment we sit down to eat." Inside, though, he knew if Fausto asked, he'd answer. Always. The party traveled at once, arriving at a humble cottage standing alone on a quiet stretch of countryside. Remote and solitary, It seemed an unremarkable place from the outside, the sort of home travelers might pass without a second glance. But when they stepped inside, the space opened into a vast hall lined with relics of adventure. There was the shell of some enormous, spiky turtle beast, the charred skull of a dragon far too smug in life, a frozen face that looked like it had glared winter itself into being, and a spiked mask that radiated nightmares. One wall held a horned devil with a grin too wide, another a squid-faced horror whose tentacles had been nailed in place. A hulking demon's jawbone hung beside the desiccated hand of a lich that seemed oddly familiar from a stage play, and in the corner loomed the silhouette of something so colossal and armored it could only be called the Beast That Stomps. High above, a glass case preserved the curled husk of a creature with too many perfect forms, and next to it, absurdly, a charred, sticky lump that still held the faint outline of a smiling face, as if some confectionery titan had once walked the earth. On long tables beneath the trophies lay Fausto's other prizes, a puzzle box etched with patterns no sane mind should try to solve, a golden ring that seemed far too eager to slip onto a finger, a silver chalice that refilled itself with something suspiciously red, a cracked crown that whispered when no one wore it, a dagger made of black glass that refused to reflect its wielder, and a dusty lamp that rattled on its own as though something inside was getting impatient. In the middle of it all sat Fausto, fat, blind, half-deaf, and still sharper than any sword in the room. Beside the hearth, another figure lingered in silence, cloaked and hooded, his face hidden in the shadows. He did not speak, only nodded politely as the party entered, letting Fausto take the lead. Fausto turned his head as the party entered, his cloudy eyes searching the air. A grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. Ah, the clatter of boots, the smell of wet cloaks, and the faint sound of my apprentice grumbling under his breath. Argos, Bringer, you haven't changed a bit. Still late, still sighing, still convinced the shadows are after you. Argos opened his mouth to object, but Fausto raised a hand. And yet, still loyal, still brave enough to bring your friends when called. Maybe I taught you something after all. He shifted in his chair, reaching out with a hand that found Luka's arm instead. Ah, so this is your boy. I see he inherited his mother's frame. Lucky for him, the old man said, patting Luka's arm. Can you believe it was an ordeal for your father just to carry a few tomes to the upper shelf? Fausto chuckled, then leaned back with a satisfied sigh. Luka puffed up proudly, unable to contain himself. Yes, you should have seen me, Master Fausto. Swinging my greatsword at the monstrous duck of Bageltown, it was quacking terror itself. He swung an imaginary blade through the air for emphasis, nearly knocking a dusty banner off the wall. Fausto smirked, tilting his head toward the sound. What's this I hear about a duck? He barked. Speak up, boy. My ears aren't what they used to be. Before Luka could continue his tale, the hooded figure cleared his throat. The sound was measured, deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was calm, stoic, regal. I am Edward Pippolino III, said the short, energetic man seated next to Fausto. His disguise was simple, plain cloak, scuffed boots, but his posture was pure royalty. And I need your help. If I were not king, I would join you myself. The party exchanged wide-eyed glances, then bowed with respect. It was the king himself. Hannah tilted her head, studying the king's eyes and the set of his jaw. Something about his face stirred a strange tug in her heart, a whisper of familiarity. She said nothing, but the thought lingered like a moth circling a lantern. King Edward continued. An ancient relic has been stolen, an artifact older than our kingdom itself. For generations it has been guarded in a sealed box, locked away because of the danger it was said to hold. The truth of what lies inside has been forgotten, even to me, but the old warnings remain, and now it is gone. Fausto folded his hands, and for the first time his voice lost its playful edge. The teasing old mentor was gone. In his place spoke the seasoned wizard who had once commanded armies and faced terrors alone. I am retired, but my student— His blind eyes turned toward Argos, steady and certain. And his companions are the ones you need. Argos felt his stomach drop. Ary smirked. Hannah inclined her head in quiet acceptance. Luka raised his sword with enthusiasm, accidentally knocking over the helm of an old armor standing nearby. Fausto sighed. King Edward frowned. Ary snorted. Hannah apologized. Argos covered his face with his hand. And just like that, their greatest adventure began. The party was led to the royal vault to investigate the theft. By the time they arrived, the place was still and hushed, yet carried the heavy air of something dreadful having passed through. They questioned the shaken survivors, first the guards within the castle, then the townsfolk outside its walls. Their stories came in fragments, overlapping and half-whispered. The artifact had been guarded by soldiers and bound within layers of magic, but the intruder swept aside both as though they were nothing more than cobwebs. The guards were cut down in moments, the wards peeled away one by one with chilling precision. And yet, nothing else was touched. Chests of coin, jeweled crowns, relics of kings long dead, all lay exactly where they had been. Only the sealed box was taken. Some swore they had seen a hooded figure wandering the streets earlier that evening, silent and watchful, vanishing whenever someone turned to confront it. Others spoke of what came after, a great shadow rising into the sky, wings spread wide. As it moved, it left a strange distortion in the air, faint after-images that shimmered and broke apart, as though memory itself struggled to keep pace. One detail, at least, was certain. The hooded figure and its shadow had been seen last flying east, toward the mountains. On the road, the party encountered another familiar face, Blake Yorkham, the King's Court wizard, and Argos's old rival. Short in stature, sharp in tongue, and still smarting from the shame of the theft, Blake burned with resentment. He had been Fausto's other apprentice, the one who studied harder, practiced longer, and yet still found himself overshadowed by Argos's supposed accomplishments. Blake stepped into the path, staff in hand. Only the wizard worthy of Fausto's legacy should continue this quest. Argos, I challenge you to a duel. Argos sighed and rubbed his temples. Oh, it's you. Blake, we're busy, just let us pass. Busy? Blake's eyes blazed. You think this is trivial? This is destiny. One of us is the true heir to Master Fausto's teachings, and it isn't you. Argos gave him a weary look, more fatherly than confrontational. Blake, I always told you you're talented. You don't need to prove anything. Don't you dare patronize me, Blake snapped, his voice cracking with indignation. You bumble through life with your ridiculous luck and everyone praises you. But I studied. I earned my place. The party exchanged glances. Ary stifled a laugh. Luka leaned on his greatsword, whispering, I like this guy's fire. Blake raised his staff. Sparks flew, lightning cracked, and the duel began. His spells were swift, precise, and dangerous, and Argos looked utterly outmatched. He stumbled, ducked, and flinched, somehow surviving by sheer chance. Then came the crucial moment. Blake conjured a spear of crackling fire, hurling it straight at Argos. Luka erupted with wild enthusiasm, leaping, waving his sword over his head, shouting loud enough to wake birds from the trees. Go, Dad! You've got this! Show him who's the real master! Argos turned and smiled and waved at his son, and in that instant the flaming spear screamed past his ear, close enough to singe a lock of his hair, before striking a tree in the background with a loud explosion. Blake froze, veins bulging. Did he just... You oaf? Shut up! He roared at Luka, trembling with fury. Then Argos's smile faded, his eyes sharpening, a faint glow sparking within them. Time seemed to move slowly. There was no stumble in his stance, no hesitation in his grip. It all happened in a flash. Blake's rage left the tiniest opening, and Argos seized it without a word. His staff snapped upward, and in an instant a bolt of yellow lightning cracked through the air at the speed of light. It struck Blake square in the chest, blasting him into the mud with a violent splash. For a heartbeat the battlefield was silent, the smell of ozone hanging heavy. Argos stood with staff lowered, eyes still faintly glowing, and for once it was hard to believe luck had anything to do with it at all. Ary and Hannah winced at the impact. Ouch! Blake pounded the mud weakly with his fists. Not again. Not like this. This is unfair. His words slurred as his eyes rolled back and he slumped into unconsciousness. Argos lowered his staff, still catching his breath. I did tell you to let us pass. Hannah knelt and murmured a quick prayer, mending Blake's injuries enough to leave him safe and sound, though still unconscious from exhaustion. Luka, grinning, scooped him up with ease and set him down behind a patch of bushes, patting his dad's rival's shoulder. The party marched on, leaving Blake sleeping peacefully in the mud. That night, as the party camps at the edge of the eastern foothills, a chill spreads across the firelight. A hooded figure appears, dark and silent. His voice hisses from beneath the cowl. Turn back. Pursue me no further, or you will die. Luka leaps forward without hesitation, greatsword whistling, but the strike meets only air as the shadow twists away. Ary dashes behind with a flourish and drives her rapier through the hood. Instead of flesh, the garment crumples to the ground, empty. From the folds of the fallen hood, the air erupted in madness. Black ducks poured out in a screeching storm, wings beating, beaks snapping, 100 glowing red eyes cutting through the night. Their furious quacks rose like a war cry as they swarmed the camp. By the golden sun! Hannah gasped, raising her hands as the first wave dove for them. A shimmering barrier of light spread wide, shielding her companions from the initial pecking onslaught. They're just ducks! Luka bellowed with glee, charging in with his greatsword. He swung in wild arcs, cleaving 3 at once. They burst into black smoke with each strike, vanishing as if they had never been. Evil ducks! Don't underestimate poultry! Ary shouted, vaulting onto a log. With dazzling flourishes, she slashed left and right, her rapier flicking faster than the eye could follow. I'll roast you like the fowl you are, she taunted, twirling through the swarm. Every duck she pierced dissolved into vapor, leaving only drifting feathers. One duck latched onto Luka's hair. He spun in circles, trying to shake it off. Dad, it's biting me! Argos shrieked, hopping back as a dozen evil ducks came at him in a V formation. Ducks again, ducks! Duck off, ducks! He stumbled, raised his staff in panic, and a gout of fire burst forth. The formation scattered as half the flock turned to smoke mid-air, their glowing eyes winking out one by one. Careful, Hannah cried, pushing the flames back with her light to keep them from spreading to the party's tents. Quack, quack, quack! Came the furious chorus as more ducks swarmed. One pecked Ary's hat clean off. She gasped, caught it mid-air, and stabbed the offender in the same motion. It vanished in a puff of smoke. Touch the hat! Face the blade! Ah! Luka roared, ripping the last duck from his hair and hurling it to the ground, where it exploded into a cloud of feathers. He stomped another flat. It vanished beneath his boot. Keep him coming! I'm just getting warmed up! Argos flailed with his staff as ducks swarmed around him. Get off me, you feathered demons! One bit his sleeve. He smacked it away and thrust forward, words spilling from his lips without thought. A surge of yellow energy burst outward, blasting the nearest ducks into mist. His eyes glowed for a heartbeat, sharp and focused, and then the moment was gone, leaving him panting and dazed. The flock faltered, their formation breaking. They're weakening, Hannah called, her voice carrying above the quacking. She thrust her holy symbol skyward, and a beam of golden light pierced the chaos. Ducks screamed and melted into vapor, gone in the brilliance. Ary stabbed 2 more, then flicked feathers dramatically off her shoulder. And stay cooked. At last, the battlefield cleared, smoke rising from the grass where the ducks had vanished. But not all of them were gone. A ragged handful of black shapes broke away from the melee, wings beating furiously as they fled east. Their glowing red eyes bobbed like embers in the dark as they rose higher and higher, streaking straight toward the mountain. There, they're retreating, Luka shouted, already charging after them with his sword raised. Argos groaned. We are not chasing ducks across the countryside. He stopped short, following the line of red-eyed shadows until they vanished into the jagged silhouette of the fortress ruins crowning the peak. His mouth went dry. Oh no. Ary sheathed her rapier with a flourish. Of course they flee to their master. The stage is set. Hannah pressed her holy symbol to her chest, her eyes soft but troubled. Even the wicked run home when beaten. We should follow. The last echo of quacks faded into the night, leaving only the mountain looming above them. The fortress loomed above, its black stone jagged against the starlit sky. The climb was long and silent, each step up the winding path weighed down by the memory of glowing red eyes vanishing into the ruins. Even Luka, usually quick with a boast, kept his greatsword slung over his shoulder in quiet readiness. At last, they reached the gate, two massive doors, scarred by time but still defiant. Luka stepped forward, planting his hands against the wood. "Easy," Hannah cautioned softly. "I am being easy," Luka grunted. He gave the doors the gentlest push he could manage. The hinges shrieked, sparks spat, and with a thunderous crack the doors burst inward, collapsing in a cloud of dust. Argos coughed, waving a hand in front of his face. "That was your gentle?" Ary smirked, her voice low. "Subtlety is for lesser men." The dust cleared and the dark of the fortress yawned open before them. The shadow waits within. The fortress loomed like a broken fang against the night sky. Black stone jagged the horizon, its shadow stretching long over the winding path. The gates, already torn from their hinges by Luka's gentle push, lay cracked and splintered behind them. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the stench of rot. Shredded banners dangled from the rafters, their crests long faded. The silence was broken only by a faint shuffle, then a guttural quack that rattled through the empty hall. Red eyes blinked in the dark. The first of the undead duckmen staggered into the torchlight, warped figures with rotting feathers, twisted bills, and half-human limbs that dragged across the stone. More followed, their movements jerky, their quacks gurgling like the moans of the damned. "By the golden sun," Hannah whispered, gripping her holy symbol. Luka cracked his knuckles and grinned wide. "Finally, some real ducks." The creatures lurched forward in a tide of feathers and decay. "Forward!" Luka roared, charging with his greatsword. Each swing cleaved through the abominations, and each one struck dissolved into smoke, but more poured in, clawing and snapping. Ary twirled into the fray, rapier flashing. "Come now, waddling fiends, at least try to look elegant." She skewered two in a single thrust, spun, and saluted the next line with a mocking bow. Hannah spread her arms, light flaring from her holy symbol. "Golden sun, shield us!" A radiant barrier blossomed outward, holding the undead at bay as their claws screeched uselessly against it. Meanwhile, Argos stumbled backward, staff trembling in his grip. "No, no, no, too many!" A duckman lunged at him, and in his panic he swung. A burst of flame erupted, engulfing the creature and setting a whole cluster ablaze. They vanished into smoke, leaving Argos blinking at his own handiwork. The battle raged, chaotic and absurd. Luka waded in, swinging wide. Half man, half duck, and wholly pathetic. Ary danced, laughing as she cut through their ranks. Hannah's light flared like the sun itself. Argos shrieked, flailed, and somehow kept vaporizing enemies with each blast. At last, the last of the duckmen gave a rattling quack before vanishing into smoke. Silence fell, broken only by the party's heavy breathing and Luka's satisfied laugh. "Duck stew," he said proudly, resting his sword on his shoulder. "Duck plague," Argos muttered, brushing ash from his sleeve. They pressed deeper. Downward spiraling stairs led to a cavernous chamber, its walls carved with ancient runes glowing faintly green. At the far end, the hooded figure stood waiting, shrouded in smoke. "You were warned," the voice hissed, echoing from all directions. "This place will be your tomb." Spectral ducks burst from the walls, shadowy wings beating furiously. The figure moved like smoke, here one moment, gone the next. "Stay behind me!" Hannah cried, her shield of light expanding against the shadow. Ary leapt forward, rapier gleaming. "I've dueled worse than smoke and feathers." She struck, but her blade passed through empty air. Luka swung wildly, his great sword cleaving through pillars as much as enemies. "Stand still so I can hit you." Argos tried to counter, but the shadow's spells overwhelmed him. A blast of darkness knocked him flat, and for a heartbeat the figure loomed over him, blade of shadow raised. Then a lance of arcane light struck from the side. The shadow staggered back with a hiss. Blake Yorkham stood at the stairwell, cloak torn, face bruised, staff blazing with power. "Did you really think I'd let you take the glory, Argos?" "Blake," Argos groaned, pulling himself up. "You should be." "Quiet. We finish this." For the first time, Blake and Argos fought side by side. Blake's spells were sharp and precise, carving into the shadow's form. Argos's were wild, unpredictable, but struck with surprising force. Together their magic crackled and collided, pinning the hooded figure against the cavern wall. Luka whooped, cheering both at once. Ary fenced with the last of the spectral minions, dispatching them in dramatic flourishes. Hannah's prayers blazed brighter than ever, shielding them from the shadow's counterstrikes. The hooded figure hissed, form unraveling like smoke. "This is not the end." And with that, it dissipated into the cracks of the chamber, gone. At the center of the chamber sat the sealed box, dusty, unbroken, trembling faintly. Luka gave the box an experimental shake. Clunk. The sound was wrong. Hollow. Luka grinned, marching forward. He scooped it up under one arm and tugged at the lid. "No!" Argos and Blake shouted in unison, their voices echoing like thunder. "Too late." With a cheerful heave, he flung the lid open. Inside, nothing, empty. The party gaped. Argos's jaw dropped. Blake's face turned scarlet. "We were too late," Argos whispered. "Or led astray," Hannah murmured, clutching her holy symbol. Blake slammed his fist against the wall. "You imbecile! You could have unleashed—" His words caught. He stared into the hollow box, trembling with rage. "It's gone." Luka peered inside, confused. "Huh. Thought there'd be, glowing doom or something." He gave it another shake. Clunk. Nothing but air. Ary smirked, stepping away from the box. "A magician's trick. The hand distracts, while the real prize is slipped away." That was when she noticed a faint draft from the far wall. Her eyes narrowed. With a flourish, she pressed her palm against the stone. A hidden mechanism groaned. The wall slid back, revealing a secret tunnel leading deeper into the earth. The party exchanged grim looks. Argos and Blake still seethed. Hannah prayed softly. Ary smiled like she'd expected it all along. Luka just hefted his sword and laughed. "Round two?" Together they stepped into the tunnel. The secret tunnel descended deeper than any of them expected, the air growing colder with every step. Their footsteps echoed against walls carved with strange murals, the paint cracked but still vivid. By torchlight, the story unfolded in jagged lines. Duck-headed priests bowed before a colossal duck dragon, its beak stretched wide in a triumphant honk. The next panel showed armies crushed beneath golden lines of sound, men clutching their ears as they fell. Then came a figure of an ancient king, sword raised, driving the monster to the ground. The final mural showed a black egg, dark energy swirling around it, sealed inside a great chest and carried into a castle. Ary tilted her head. "Is that supposed to be a duck? Or a turnip with wings?" "Have some respect," Hannah whispered, hand pressed over her holy symbol. This was no joke to them. They sealed a curse. Luka leaned close to the mural of the duck dragon. "I would have fought it." "You'd have been eaten," Argos muttered. Blake pushed his way forward, staff tapping importantly against the stone. He cleared his throat and launched into lecture. "If you'd care to know, this mural is the work of the Anseriform cults, an offshoot of the greater Avesian sects that flourished during the late 5th dynasty. Their theology was centered upon the convergence of avian and draconic archetypes, culminating in rituals of sonic supplication. That is to say, the honking was considered not merely symbolic, but an actual manifestation of divine resonance believed to fracture the very boundaries of reality. Notice here. He jabbed at a cracked panel with his staff. The stylized depiction of waveforms. Primitive, yes, but clearly indicative of auditory thaumaturgy, long before such terms were codified in modern arcanography. And of course, the black egg itself. He puffed up his chest. Was the paramount relic, not a mere artifact of containment but a transubstantial focus of necro-ornithic energies, an object of both worship and terror. He turned expectantly for awe, or at least a gasp. Ary yawned and picked at her rapier's hilt. Luka traced the duck dragon's beak with a finger. Hannah's eyes were closed in prayer. Argos sighed and rubbed his temples. Blake's jaw trembled. Did none of you hear a word I said? His voice cracked into a shriek. Why do I even bother bringing scholarship to simpletons? The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and all words died. At the center lay the colossal bones of the duck dragon itself, ribs arching like the beams of a cathedral, skull yawning open in a silent scream. Ancient offerings littered the ground, cracked golden eggs, broken idols, rusted weapons that had once gleamed with reverence. And there, at the ribcage's heart, stood the hooded shadow, the black egg glowing in his hands. Its aura sucked the torchlight inward, darkness bleeding across the stone. At last, the shadow hissed, voice echoing from every wall. Flesh to bind bone, death to sing in life's place. He rose, smoke billowing around him, and pressed the egg into the chest of the skeleton. The bones shuddered. Dark sinew crawled across them, knitting cracked ribs together. Leathery skin stretched across the wings. The skull split wide, glowing red eyes igniting in the sockets. The shadow's voice twisted into a roar as the Quakolich rose, a grotesque parody of life. Dragon, duck, and corpse all at once. It spread its wings with a thunderous crack and let out a honk so loud the walls shook. The sonic blast knocked Ary to her knees and sent Argos tumbling back, clutching his ears. By the golden sun! Hannah cried, planting her feet and raising her holy symbol. Her light flared, forming a shield around her companions. Even so, Luka staggered, sword rattling in his grip. Yes! Luka roared through the ringing in his ears. Finally, a real fight! He charged into the Quackolich's legs, smashing with all his strength. Bones splintered and the beast lurched sideways, but with one sweeping kick it hurled him across the chamber into a crumbling pillar. Ary leapt onto its wing, rapier stabbing between ribs. You call that a roar? I've heard loaves of bread rise louder. She swung herself up its side, jabbing again and again, leaving trails of smoke where her blade pierced leathery flesh. Spectral ducks burst from the monster's ribcage, swarming the party. Argos shrieked, flailing his staff, then suddenly blasted a cluster into nothing with a desperate fireball. He blinked at the smoldering ground. Meant to do that. The Quackolich reared back and honked again, louder, the shockwave cracking the floor. Ary lost her grip and plummeted, rolling across the stone. Luka crawled from rubble only to be swatted aside by a massive claw. Hannah's shield flickered, barely holding. Now, Argos! Blake shouted, hurling a lance of lightning. I know! Argos panicked, firing off his own blast of flame. But the spells collided mid-air, exploding in a flash that singed the walls instead of the Quackolich. The monster pressed forward, honking triumphantly, shadowy ducks diving toward the scattered heroes. Your coordination is abysmal, Blake roared. Stop bossing me around, Argos snapped, coughing in the smoke. The Quackolich surged toward them, claws raised. For a heartbeat, it seemed certain the party would be crushed. Then Hannah stepped forward, shield blazing, holding the monster back just long enough for Ary to scramble up again and Luka to stagger to his feet. Argos gritted his teeth. We don't have the luxury of rivalry. Follow my lead. Blake hesitated, then nodded, breathless. Fine, for now. They raised their staves together. This time their magic aligned, Blake's precision channeling Argos's wild power. A roaring beam of flame and lightning smashed into the Quackolich's chest, staggering it backward. Luka roared and pinned it at the legs. Ary vaulted up its ribs, plunging her blade deep. Hannah's voice rose in prayer, her light blazing like the sun. The Quackolich shrieked, wings flailing, bones cracking under the renewed assault. Now! Argos shouted. Blake mirrored him. Their staffs flared, twin lances of power ripping through the monster's skull. Luka drove his sword into its spine. Ary stabbed into its glowing ribcage. And Hannah raised her holy symbol high. "Golden sun, burn this shadow!" Light erupted. Radiance flooded the cavern, searing through bone and smoke. The Quakolich honked one last time, a pitiful squeak as the egg in its chest fell. The shadow screamed, torn apart, consumed in the blaze of holy light. With a final rattling honk, the Quakolich collapsed, bones scattering across the chamber. Smoke curled upward, then was gone. The egg rolled free, black and silent, its glow extinguished. For a moment, none of them spoke. Luka finally broke the silence, leaning on his sword with a bruised grin. Now that was a fight. Ary plucked a feather drifting from the air and twirled it. And the most ridiculous. Argos stared at the egg, unease in his eyes. Blake stepped forward, voice grim. "It must be returned to the palace. Sealed again, at once." Hannah knelt, whispering a prayer of thanks. The shadow is gone. The golden sun has triumphed. Yet as the egg sat cold in the dust, silent but still whole, none of them felt entirely safe. The journey back to the capital was a blur of aching feet and wild retellings. Luka recounted the fight with the Quakolich at least a dozen times, each version with more smashing and fewer near-deaths. Ary corrected him constantly, always casting herself as the true star. Hannah smiled patiently through it all, whispering quiet prayers of thanks. Argos muttered about sore joints, while Blake walked with a stiff back, grumbling about credit where it's due. At last, the palace gates loomed ahead. Trumpets blared as the weary heroes entered the throne room. King Edward Pippolino III sat upright on his throne, short and sturdy, his stoic face bright with anticipation. The party knelt. Argos, still holding the sealed box that contained the egg, lifted it toward the dais. "Your Majesty," he said, voice steady but tired, "we have returned your—" His foot caught the hem of his robe. Argos stumbled. The box slipped from his hands, clattering to the marble floor. Gasps echoed across the chamber as the lid popped open. The black egg rolled out, wobbling across the polished stone. "Stop it," Blake hissed, reaching too late. The egg bumped against the king's boot. The hall fell silent. Even Luka's grin froze. The king himself, unshakable in all matters of state, stared down wide-eyed as the egg cracked open with a sharp snap. From within emerged the tiniest, fluffiest duckling. Its feathers were midnight black, its eyes glowing a soft, eerie yellow. It blinked, wobbled on its webbed feet, then nuzzled against the king's boot. "Mommy?" it chirped. The throne room erupted. Ary collapsed into laughter, wiping tears from her eyes. All that for a baby bird." Luka knelt instantly, eyes wide with wonder. "Can we keep it? Please? I'll train it. I'll teach it to fight." Hannah pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. "Golden sun preserve us. Is this mercy or a trial?" Argos just stared, pale as parchment. "I dropped it." Blake's jaw hung open, words failing him for once. Finally he spat. "This is an outrage." King Edward Pippolino III, stoic as ever, bent down, scooped the duckling into his arms, and straightened with a resolute nod. "If destiny decrees I am mother to this creature, then so be it." The duckling nestled against his chest, cooing softly. Luka pumped a fist in triumph. "Best quest ever!" Ary smirked and bowed with flourish. "And the curtain falls, life is absurd comedy." Argos groaned, rubbing his temples. "Fausto will never let me live this down." Hannah looked heavenward, whispering, "May the golden sun grant us patience." The court cheered, trumpets blared, and in the midst of it all, the most beautiful black duckling with glowing yellow eyes quacked happily in the arms of the king.